Separate buses for Palestinians travelling into Israel sparks a heated debate. It's a move welcomed by Jewish settlers and even some Palestinian commuters, but has been lambasted as racist by many others in the region. Is this a new application of the old separate but equal doctrine? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Mike Hanna. Dedicated buses for Palestinian workers have triggered a renewed debate over segregation and inequality in Israel. Tens of thousands of Palestinians from the West Bank commute daily to work in Israel. But following complaints by West Bank settlers about sharing buses, Israel's Transport Ministry has introduced 2 new bus services for Palestinians only. It says the new buses offer Palestinian commuters a cheaper alternative. But critics have drawn parallels with the separate but equal doctrine that was declared discriminatory by the US Supreme Court in the 1950s. And the headline of one mass circulation Israeli newspaper read, "On the bus to Israeli Apartheid." A number of Palestinian commuters have actually welcomed the move, but not so the Palestinian Authority, which takes a wider view in its rejection.
It's worse than segregation. This is segregation under occupation. This is an occupying power that does not want to let go of its occupation and wants to legislate a permanent state of racism and discrimination.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by our 3 guests. From Cambridge, Ben White, journalist and author of Israel Apartheid, A Beginner's Guide. He's been visiting and writing on the region for more than a decade. From Tel Aviv, Gregg Roman, director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Pittsburgh. He is a former political advisor to the Knesset and a former official at the Ministry of Defense. From Ramallah, Mustafa Barghouti, from the Palestinian National Initiative and member of the Palestinian Legislative Council. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Mustafa Barghouti. Is this discrimination?
It's much worse than just discrimination. It's the worst form of discrimination. It's a consolidation of a system of segregation, similar to what prevailed in the United States for a long time, according to Jim Crow regulations in the south of the United States, which Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement struggled against. And without which removal a person like President Obama would not have become a president. It's similar to the apartheid system that prevailed in South Africa at one point of time, which the whole world decided to boycott, divest, and sanction till it was removed. It is not just segregation of buses. We are talking about segregation of roads, which, by the way, did not exist even in the worst time of apartheid in South Africa or during the segregation time in the United States.
Well, let's go to, if we may, just at this point, Mustafa, let's go to Gregg Roman and get his reaction immediately.
To compare this system to apartheid discredits those individuals who suffered under the tyrannical South African regime and Jim Crow laws that took place in the South during the 1960s. In fact, one of the ways that this system came about in order to come into place by having 2 separate bus lines was at the request of Palestinian workers who were trying to be able to spend more time with their families by having an easier, cheaper, and faster alternative to get to work. It was actually a negotiation between Prime Minister Salam Fayyad and Israeli Finance Minister Yuval Steinitz in 2012 that led to an agreement signed by both the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government in order to ease measures to make it more work opportunities available for Palestinians. And this is just the next logical alternative. In fact, you have thousands of Palestinians who are now camping out at the starting point of these 2 bus lines. And only yesterday on the Israeli news, there was a Jewish reporter that was able to take this bus line all the way through 15 stops that are in Israel proper and not in the West Bank. So any accusations that my 2 guests who are accompanying on this evening are going to lay out there aren't based in reality. They're just trying to use this vehicle as another way to criticize the Israeli government when the actual responsibility was a Palestinian request for this system.
Well, let's go to Ben White with that particular point. Your view?
Yeah, I would just actually first like to pick up 2 things that the previous guest just mentioned, who wants to dismiss the accusation of apartheid out of hand as if it discredits the black South Africans who resisted apartheid in the past. I mean, many people in South Africa today are resisting Israeli apartheid. The BDS movement has made great advances in South Africa. But more than that, and this is salient for the bigger picture question here, last year the UN's Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination published its periodic report on Israel. And it used the most damning language about the sorts of Israeli policies that we're looking at today and others, both inside the occupied territories as well as inside the pre-67 borders. And the UN committee used the language of segregation, and they said that Israeli violations are severe and systematic enough as to warrant a reminder of the prohibition of, and they used the word, apartheid. So I think we need to remember that while the bus issue has a lot of cultural resonance in the West, and obviously in the US in particular because of the history, it is just one part of a much bigger picture, as Mustafa mentioned as well. Talking about a regime of illegal colonies throughout the West Bank, if you include illegally annexed East Jerusalem, 500,000 settlers, Israeli citizens living in colonies surrounded by millions of Palestinians who don't have citizenship, have different set of rights and are ruled by military law.
Well, let's go back to Mustafa Barghouti with that particular point. We are looking at the buses issue, but would apparently to be representative of a wider whole. Do you think it needs to be looked at in the wider context? We see, for example, that many commuters have, in fact, welcomed the move. It does make it easier for them to get to work. Should that influence the debate?
Well, in my opinion, it is a lie to say that Palestinians accept this regime or like it. And if any Palestinian agrees with it, he would be participating in this crime. The reality is that Israel has become an apartheid state, and its occupation in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, including East Jerusalem, has become a system of apartheid. Not just against Palestinians living in occupied territories, but also against Palestinians who live in Israel itself. So in my opinion, this is a system that affects every aspect of life. What is apartheid? Apartheid is about having two different systems of laws for two people living in the same area. And that's exactly what we have. I was born in Jerusalem. I worked as a medical doctor in Jerusalem for 15 years. And now the Israeli army prevents me from reaching East Jerusalem, from visiting my sister there. This Israeli system is affecting every aspect of life. On average, an illegal Israeli settler who is sitting on a stolen land from Palestinian is allowed to use 2,400 cubic meters of water per capita per year, while a Palestinian citizen can use only 50. So the Israelis are allowed to use 42 times more than Palestinians. On average, an Israeli GDP per capita is $32,000, while it is only 1,400 for Palestinians, and we are obliged to pay the same prices like Israelis. More than that, this Israeli apartheid system forces us to pay double the price for water and electricity. So it is time for the Israelis to look in the mirror and see the reality. This is not only the longest occupation in modern history. This is not the longest disposition in recent history. It is also a system of apartheid that, according to Ronnie Kasrils, who was a Jewish minister in the South African government, he said in front of me, this is a much worse apartheid than what prevailed in South Africa at one point of time.
Well, let's just go to Gregg Roman at this particular point. Gregg Roman, leaving aside terms like apartheid, do we see practical segregation existing? Is there segregation? Let's start with that particular point.
No, I believe that segregation in and of itself comes from the Palestinian Authority. I mean, if we look at the rights that Palestinians have in terms of their political autonomy and their own independence, there's a few things that they're not allowed to do, which is strictures brought on by the PA itself. If a Palestinian man wishes to sell a Jew his land, he'll face the death penalty. If a Palestinian man wishes to buy Israeli goods, he'll face a significant fine. If a member of Hamas or anyone in the Palestinian, or this is the Hamas government in the Gaza Strip, negotiates with an Israeli, he'll be ostracized. So any of the measures that we've seen in the past, which have been able to kind of try to breed coexistence, try to be able to bring people together, is essentially espoused by the Palestinian Authority. Now, if we get back to the original purpose of why these bus lines were created, it was to increase greater economic opportunity for Palestinian workers who can increase their wages by working in the Israeli pre-67 territories. These are Palestinians who go to the Israeli government, they request a work permit, and they make, on average, 2 times the salary that a Palestinian worker will make in Palestinian Authority administrative areas. The reason being because they know they can provide a better life for their family not when they're separate and equal. They work side by side along other Jews in the jobs that they have. We're talking about accountants, lawyers, doctors, and I'm sorry that Mr. Barghouti can't go visit his sister in East Jerusalem, but perhaps it has to do with the fact that he's too busy accusing other individuals responsible for the plight that was brought on by his people's government. So
well, I'll get back to, I'll let Mustafa Barghouti respond to that in a moment, if I may, Greg. But I want to go on to...
Let me finish.
Yes, finish.
Let me finish this one point. Just one point. One point. If he goes to Kalandia and says these kind of terms to Palestinian workers who are trying to provide for their families, I'd like to see what the Palestinian commuter has to say about this, as opposed to a political talking head.
Well, let's just go to Ben White on this particular issue, though. The point that I was attempting to bring up, whether or not some may welcome the ease of movement for them to be able to work and develop income, that really is not the point, is it? We are looking at a far wider principle behind something happening here.
Right, and it's pretty rich for a defender of Israeli apartheid like Mr. Roman to exploit the desperation, the economic desperation of a colonized, occupied people. But this is a classic sort of strategy and discourse that you find in many colonial regimes. Mr. Roman probably doesn't realize that he sounded very similar to the South African apartheid spokespersons in days gone by, when he sort of praises the economic opportunities afforded by the benevolent colonial power to the occupied people. Palestinians, whether they're citizens inside 67 lines, whether Palestinians in Gaza, Palestinians in the West Bank, they don't want to be grateful for handouts. They don't want to be grateful for shared industrial zones. They want their rights and they want their freedom. And the question that you put to Mr. Roman just before he spoke about this was whether he thought there was a system of practical segregation. He was unable to answer that because the answer is yes, and he obviously doesn't want to admit that. But that is the conclusion of the UN, that is the conclusion of Amnesty International, that is the conclusion of Human Rights Watch. It's the conclusion of every fair-minded person who goes there and sees what is happening.
Well, let's just look at these points specifically. Human rights groups, has been mentioned, insist that Israel does discriminate between Israelis and Palestinians. Israel's basic law doesn't contain a commitment to equality for all before the law. Activists say that Israel carries out a system of de facto segregation in the West Bank. While Israeli settlements are allowed to expand, Palestinian construction permits are regularly denied without cause. There are also two separate systems of education, one in Hebrew in predominantly Jewish municipalities and one in Arabic in what are described as the municipalities of the minorities. And Israel also prevents Palestinians holding Israeli citizenship and those living in the West Bank and in Gaza from being reunified. That stops someone from the West Bank, for example, marrying someone from Gaza or indeed in Israel. But let's go back to Gregg Roman on these points. Regardless of the defense of it, is this concept of separate but equal a part of a semi-official Israeli approach?
No, because the concept isn't separate but equal. The top performing high school in Israel last year was in Al-Faham, an Arab majority area. The work opportunities that the Israeli government provides to its Palestinians that's working in the West Bank and also in Gaza are separate and unequal. And I do take account to what Mr. White has said regarding the UN-issued committees and human rights groups that substantially target the Israeli authorities. If you look at the background of these committees, and I'm not trying to equate this to moral relativism, the same bodies like the Syrian government, who's massacring 70,000 of its own citizens, including thousands of Palestinians, was the chair of that committee in the United Nations who issued that damning report. It's really easy to use individuals like Nilay Paivai and Richard Falk, who are renowned anti-Zionists, and being able to do this. I do know what I'm talking about because I worked side by side with Palestinians for 3 years when I was a member of the civil administration in Ramallah. I mean, the people who you're talking about are external actors who are trying to use the Palestinian-Israeli issue as a political wedge in a football to be able to take distractions off of their own political issues. But if you look at the everyday Palestinian worker, what he wants to do is to be able to have independence, he wants to be able to feed his family, and he wants to be able to have autonomy. But the real setbacks that are being faced is that when actors such as yourself and Mr. Barghouti come on television channels like Al Jazeera and use the opportunity to espout and pontificate political messages when you're not really taking care of the essential people that you're trying to advocate for.
Yes, so indeed. Let's just hear from Mustafa Barghouti on that particular issue, if you may.
Give me the chance to respond. Mr. Roman does not recognize that he is behaving as a racist now because he is having this condescending behavior, thinking that he knows what is the best interest of the Palestinian people on our behalf. And if he is accusing me of being involved in the struggle for the liberation of our people from apartheid, then I am proud of that. As a matter of fact, our involvement in nonviolent resistance, besides our involvement in providing health care to our people, is about liberating not only Palestinians, but also Israelis from this terrible system of apartheid that nobody can be proud about. But let me remind you of something. First of all, he's speaking about the rights of workers. These workers that are taken to Israel to work there and who are forced to work in settlements are receiving different wages from the Israelis. They are also discriminated against when they are doing this work. They have no privileges and no benefits and no social benefits like Israeli workers do. Let me also add to that Palestinians from many villages inside Israel itself are prevented from going back to their villages like Iqrith and Kufr Bur'am. The people of Iqrith and Kufr Bur'am have been forced out of their villages since 1948, and they live inside Israel, and they have Israeli citizenship, yet they are not allowed to go back. In the West Bank, 62% of the land of the West Bank is controlled completely by the Israeli army, which does not allow us to build there. And if we build houses in our own land, they come and demolish it. Inside Jerusalem, they are not giving permits for people to build houses, and if they build, they again come and demolish the houses. What is apartheid? This is apartheid. And when you speak about Israel as an exclusive Jewish state, you are practically consolidating a system of apartheid.
Well, let's go to Gregg Roman at this particular point to allow him to respond to these points.
Okay, so first of all, it's not an exclusive Jewish state. It's 20% Israeli Arab and it's 80% Jewish. But what you're trying to deny the fact here is that every single fact and figure that you come up with is met with reality on the Israeli side.
The number of Palestinians living in the land of Palestine is now equal to the Jewish Israelis.
New Arab cities. Sir, but you're speaking from a one-state
narrative. We're equal in numbers now. The number of Palestinians inside Palestine is equal to you.
It doesn't matter about numbers, sir. What you are trying
to say
we are
equal in numbers, we should be equal in rights.
You do not recognize a Jewish presence here. It is equal in rights, sir, in the areas that your Palestinian Authority, that you ran for president of this authority in 2005, and now you're roundly outright rejecting the policies that your own government promotes. So what happens?
Actually, the Palestinian Authority has no authority whatsoever. The Palestinian Authority is under your occupation, under the colonial system of control of the apartheid system, and it cannot do much because it is an occupied authority.
You have free elections.
We were arrested. I was arrested.
It's not about free elections.
5 times.
Well, let at this particular point. Let's just take a pause here.
Hold on,
if we may, at this particular point, I'll give everybody the right to have a say in a short while. But let's just take a pause here. And we've been getting a lot of feedback on Facebook on this issue. Your L. Francis says, sounds a lot like separate but equal, a throwback to Jim Crow. But Boris Popovich makes this point. One step closer to safety for Israelis. The war worked wonders. There's a massive drop in Israeli civilian deaths. This will help just that little bit more. Dor Ashkenaz says, guys, this is not done as segregation. You are fools for thinking this. The tension between the Arabs and the Israelis in those regions are great. These buses go to Palestinian-specific destinations, and the Palestinians probably prefer this as well. Kagili Benjamin Magoy says, this brings back very painful memories of what apartheid was to us as South Africans. We know the fallacy of this is an improvement to your condition very well. Shame on the Israeli regime, he continues, and more shame on the US for openly continuing to protect such a ruthless regime. Well, those are strong words on Facebooks. Remembering, too, that President Obama is to visit Israel later this month. Ben White, are these issues, this whole concept of segregation, the criticism, likely to come up in those talks?
No, unfortunately, it's very unlikely that the most important issues to do with the systematic denial of Palestinian rights will come up in those talks. In fact, I have a question for Mr. Roman, because The issue of the buses, the Israeli propagandists respond to with issues of security, or in the case of Mr. Roman, from his experience as a colonial officer in the military occupation administration, the idea that it's sort of some sort of economic gesture of generosity. But just, we've been talking about the bigger picture, and you've mentioned a little bit earlier some of the issues facing Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. Well, around 70% of Israeli communities have admission committees which filter residents, okay, who allow or don't allow residents to live in these communities. And in the words of Human Rights Watch, these committees have been used to exclude Palestinian citizens of Israel. These are admission committees operating in 70% of Israeli towns. Their role is legislated for in 40% of cases, and that's a more recent law. When that law was being debated in the Knesset and was passed, one of the members of Knesset who supported it from the Yisrael Beitenu party, Avigdor Lieberman's party, he used the exact phrase in support of the law as Jews and Palestinians should be separate and equal. Okay? And he said Israel is not a state of all its citizens. It's a, quote, Jewish and democratic state. Now, I would like to know what Mr. Roman thinks of that and what the security justification is for it.
Gregg Roman, your response?
Sure, that law that came up precluded individuals from 400 members or less from being able to go into their house. And an Arab couple from Jabhat al-Ghabiyah was able to challenge that successfully in the Israeli Supreme Court. And that law was actually struck down. So what this shows is not just that the institutional structures of the Israeli government and also the state of Israel allows Palestinians.
No, the law
and
that I'm
Israelis,
talking about is still on the statute books, Mr. Roman.
To challenge,
the law I'm talking about is still on the statute books.
Hold on. What I'm trying to say, the law that you're talking about precludes any individual committee from using any racist motivations or any sort of demographically challenging motivations.
But that's exactly what it's been used for. That's exactly what it's been used for decades.
Hold on. It's not what it's been used for. It's not. If you said that the law was passed last year, then how has that law been used for decades?
That's what Human Rights Watch said in their study.
The second, it's not. Okay, Human Rights Watch in that study also came up with a disproportionate amount of accusations against the Israeli government versus what was being used with the Palestinian Authority. So let me just tell you this. If a Jewish man
the Palestinian Authority, they were looking at issues inside the pre-67 lines.
Nothing will happen. Hold on 1 second. If a Jewish man decides to sell his house to an Israeli Arab or to a Palestinian, that house will go through. If a Palestinian sells his house to a Jew, he will face the death penalty from the Palestinian Authority.
Well, let's go to Mustafa Barghouti with that particular claim that you've made a number of times, Gregg Roman. If we could just ask Mustafa Barghouti to comment on that reverse type discrimination that you are alleging. Mustafa Barghouti.
What Mr. Roman wants is that we, the Palestinians who are occupied, leave the country and give the land to the Israelis, as they did to us in 1948 when they took away our land. When Israel was declared in 1948, Palestinians owned 93%
Address the point about the death penalty, sir.
And don't interrupt me, please. And I want to say, if you look for evidence of segregation, all you need to look is at the wall. The wall that Israel has created is 3 times the length and twice as high as Berlin Wall used to be. It is not separating Israelis even from Palestinians. It is separating most of the time Palestinians from Palestinians, and it is used as an instrument for land appropriation and for land annexation. In my opinion, what you see here is a system of apartheid that is killing every aspect of life. He spoke about elections. Let me remind him that the Israeli Authority and the Israeli army arrested me 4 times during the election campaign for presidency in 2005, just because I was trying to reach out to the Palestinian voters in East Jerusalem. In my opinion, this system that Israel has created and the government of Israel has created is feeding not only racism, but hatred. Today we see every day an attack on Palestinians in East Jerusalem or in West Jerusalem, attacks in Israel everywhere against Palestinians just because they are Arabs. And this is hurting not only the future of Palestinians, but of Israelis as well. The world is changing. The world is looking for democracy, for ending segregation, for ending any system of apartheid. And strange enough, Israel is creating that system. If you want to respect the Jewish history and the suffering of Jewish people in history, you should not do this, because this hurts your future.
Well, at this particular point, I'm afraid that is all we've got time for in this intense discussion, with the shaking of heads from various members and the nodding among others. But my thanks to our guests, Ben White, Gregg Roman and Mustafa Barghouti. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your feedback, email your thoughts to insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Mike Hanna. Goodbye for now.